Hey everyone, it's Nightharo here, and today I've got an unkillable God mode, infinite sustain, super chungus, extra frosty, cooler than ice Brittleden build for you. Yeah, all the tags, all the memes. So I'm going to show you exactly how to make a extremely tanky solo build that will get you through quite a bit of content. People say all the content in the game, and it's always kind of silly because you're like, they never mean like vet trials, or oftentimes don't mean vet DLC dungeons. But this is going to be an extremely tanky build. I compared this to some other kind of builds like this that were out there currently, and I can tell you that in general it will give you more damage mitigation and do at least as much damage, if not more. Before we get into that, I do just briefly want to kind of talk about something that is more important than this video. If you don't watch anything else of this video, just watch this part. And that is how to tell if a build is good or not. Especially when you're new, it's like, how can I tell, if a build is good or not? There's a couple of tips, there's a couple of things that you can know and you can do that can really help you to figure out if someone has a good build, if there's someone you probably want to listen to, or if not. And this isn't, ubiquitous. I'm not trying to impugn the reputation of anybody who doesn't do this, but these are clearly best practices and something you should absolutely expect from any content creator, because they need to know these numbers to be able to say, hey, this is a good build. Otherwise, they're just kind of like picking stuff at random, whatever feels good. And if you really want the best advice, these are the things you want to be looking for, because absolutely a content creator will know these things if they've done their homework on the build they're presenting to you. All right, so first and foremost, you need to know if it's a DPS, how much DPS does it do? It doesn't necessarily need to be on the trial dummy, and for solo content, it really shouldn't be on the trial dummy. So the 6 mil, I think, is the way to go, or the 3 mil. Both are fine. I think I may have gotten them confused here in one of these, but that's going to give you a decent representation of how much DPS a given build can output. And then the next thing you want to know is how much damage mitigation does it have? This is something you typically won't see on really any build, and the reason for that is because it's kind of it could potentially be very difficult to calculate. So I am kind of presenting, and I'm presenting here a methodology for that perhaps we could all adopt. So what I would recommend is for everybody to go into Veteran Asylum Sanctorum, which is a vet trial. I know that's kind of weird. You could go into it on normal. I'm just suggesting vet because that's the hardest. And then you go in, you pre-buff, make sure you got all your buffs up and everything else like that, and then just let the dragon hit you. So we know from testing that this dragon normally does 155k damage, a little bit more and some change, when you have a completely blank build, no CP, no anything. And so if you go in there and you buff up and everything else and you take a hit, you can see what your damage mitigation is. And the reason I am suggesting this be experimentally determined instead of like listing all the buffs, one, there's just way too many buffs. They affect different things, and the way they're not all additive, they're multiplicative. There's a lot of stuff. I've done a whole video on it. Maybe I'll link that below on how damage mitigation works if you really want to know, but it's a little bit complicated, not something I'd recommend for new people. But basically you can say, okay, well, I took X amount of damage, and we know that normally it does 155k times some number, and that gives the new number that I just got hit for, and that tells you your unblocked damage mitigation. And that's really useful. That's a useful number, and something where you can say, oh, this person says their build is unkillable. Well, what is yours like? And then the other thing, a huge red flag for you if you're watching a video, and especially if it's a video for newer people or for like 1-bar builds and stuff like that, if people start going through all the different stats on a build, I play a lot. I run a lot of vet trials. I run hard modes. That's something that, according to people who know, only a few percentage of the people, maybe only 1% of the community even does. And I'm not even at the highest tier by any means. So I run some of the hardest content in the game, and that's something that very few people do. And I can tell you, as someone who does that and really worries about the math and getting optimized and everything like that, I never, ever look at my stats because your stats are there are consequences of other decisions you're going to make. They're not the primary thing to be concerned about. Having 50k health isn't really that useful or even important, or 40k stam or Magicka, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. With the exception of resistances are a pretty important number to know, because that helps with the total damage mitigation. But again, what I just suggested is a way of saying, hey, it's not just resistances, it's a bunch of other numbers. So you need to realize if someone's telling you all those numbers, I just don't know why. There's a term we used to use in the military for this to baffle someone with BS. Basically, you just talk nonsense and sound like you're really smart, and then hopefully they go away or keep watching, I guess, in this case. I don't want to say that that's what these people are doing. Maybe they think it's very important, these stats and everything else, but in general, I can just tell you it's not, and I think most people would agree with me. Although this is just a red flag. This doesn't mean that, again, I'm not trying to say this person definitely is trying to scam you or is this bad information. I'm just saying it should make you look more closely at other stuff, right? Just take everything in aggregate, and this should be a red flag for you. So if someone's telling you all those numbers, you have to wonder why, and why they're not telling you something a lot more useful for your build. And then the last thing, and this is honestly probably the most important, I probably should have led with this, and this is just another red flag thing. But I have noticed that there seems to be a strong correlation between the number of adjectives someone used. So someone says it's awesome, it's amazing, it's tremendous, it's insane, it's God mode, it's whatever. The more stuff like that you hear, and the less like actual information, like, hey, this provides 10% more, this provides X amount of healing, this does X amount of damage. The less you hear of actual numbers, and the more you hear of just adjectives that make it sound cool, that should be a red flag for you, like a huge one. Okay, alarm bells should be going off if this person is like, and use this skill because it does amazing, insane damage. You should, if you hear something like that, sure, it sounds cool, and you're like, oh, I want the thing that does the amazing, insane damage, but like actually, probably it doesn't, and maybe it's best, and it's the best skill to use or the most damage or whatever. But there's more informative ways to say that, and most of the time when they're doing stuff like that, it's because they have no idea, and they haven't tested it, and they haven't done their homework. So, anyways, preamble out of the way. I know that was long. I just think it's honestly more important than watching my video is that you would know that, but no one's going to click on a video if I just made just that. All right. So, all right, now let's move on to it. First thing we're going to cover is all these stats. No, I'm just kidding. So this build, though, for real, is designed to be absolutely as tanky as possible and still do decent DPS, or at least have decent DPS output. So 59k is what I got on the trial dummy, and then here on the 3 mil, I'm just under at 29k, just under 30k. So that's what you can expect to get from this build. And the reason you might want to run this build is, I don't know, if you really wanted to go solo some content and you didn't mind it taking a while, if you're getting into soloing dungeons, maybe. I'm not really sure. I just know that there's a demand for this kind of video, and so I wanted to fill that demand. I see other builds like this, and I look at them and I'm like, this could be improved. This could be better. I don't know why. I don't know what the purpose. I'm not sure I understand, but it could be improved. This could do more damage and be more tanky. So I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna make one. So that's the whole point of this video. So again, addition to the damage output, you also want to know about the damage mitigation. So unblocked damage mitigation on this build is going to be at about a little over 66%. That means that 66% of the damage you take, you're not going to take. So you're only going to be taking about 33% of any damage, any normal hit that would be coming in. So that's how much unblocked, that's without holding block damage mitigation you have. Now, if you do hold block, if you are going to be block casting for any reason, we have an ice staff with this build, and that means that ice staffs are kind of like sword and boards. They both, sword and board and an ice staff, provide the same kind of damage mitigation. So having an ice staff reduces the cost of your block by 36% and increases the amount of damage you can block by 20%. Okay, so you're going to get an additional 20% in addition to everything else you have. So our block mitigation on this build is going to be an additional 54%. Okay, so you're only going to be taking 33% of the normal damage if you're not blocking at all, and then if you do block, it's going to reduce it by another 54%. Now let's go and talk about the skills. I guess we'll start there. So first off, we're going to have Deep Fissure. This is the Magicka morph of Scorch, and this is from the glass skill line. The reason we want to use this ability is because it does quite a bit of damage. It's it's our second best damage ability, and it's going to provide both major and minor breach to our opponents. Enemies in Overland have resistances, And resistances are the first thing that drops your damage, and it's the most important thing to try to debuff on an opponent. And so with this major and minor breach, most overland opponents, or most opponents in the game rather, that are not in group content, this is going to be enough to reduce their resistances to 0 or close to 0, depending on what content you're running. I think some of the solo arenas, they have a little bit higher resistances, but I can't recall off the top of my head. But you can look it up. It's not too hard. And then next up here is Arctic Blast. This is a really cool ability. This is our burst heal. And in addition to that, it also does damage in an AoE around us and helps apply the chilled status effect, which will cause opponents to do less damage and will also increase our damage done to them. We have several things, though, that apply the chilled status effect and apply minor brittle because we're holding it, and therefore applies minor brittle because we're holding an ice staff. It's a convoluted thing in ESO. When you apply the chilled status effect while holding a frost staff, you then apply minor brittle, which is like super convoluted, right? But just applying the chilled status effect is going to reduce their damage done to you. So that's really nice because it isn't an AoE with this ability. And so that's really nice for solo content. And then next up is Frost Reach. This is going to be our main spammable, so our single target spammable. It does have a damage over time component, but we're just going to keep using it all the time. We're not really going to worry too much about the damage over time component, but it is there. And we're going to be using a staff that is really important to use this skill. And then next up is our Fetcher Infection. This ability here applies minor vulnerability to our opponents, which increases their damage taken by 5%. So that's really nice. In addition to doing damage, it also increases all the damage our opponent takes, not only from ourselves, but from anybody who might be in our group. This build, though, is designed to be for solo content and not for group content. I wouldn't really recommend going into... I think there are better builds and better things you could do if you're going into dungeons and whatever. If you're going into normal dungeons, kind of anything works, so it's not going to be a big deal. It's totally fine. But, going into anything like Vet DLC dungeons, I would not take this build. I think you could do something that would do a lot more damage. And I've got some on the channel and I'm working on some others, so they'll be out soon if they're not out already. And then last up here is Revealing Flare. This is from the PvP skill line. We actually have to go pretty deep into the PvP skill line to get this ability. Oh, and I'm sorry, Frost Reach is from the Destro staff skill line. Everything else, and it's called Destructive Reach is what it's called. And then when you put on a Frost Staff, it becomes Frost Reach. But everything else from this build is from our class skill line, so you should be able to find it without too much trouble. Our Fetcher Infection is a morph of Swarm. I forgot to mention that. And our Arctic Blast is the morph of Arctic Winds. And then Deep Fissure is our morph of Scorch. Sorry, I know that can be confusing for new people. I almost forgot to mention that. So Revealing Flare, is from the Alliance skill line, and it is from the support skill line, and it's going to be really hard to get to. I say hard, it's going to take a long time. So you can just queue up one daily battleground, go in there, try to finish second or first place. I often struggle and end up in third. But this build is pretty tanky, so it might actually not be too bad to go in there even before you have Flare and use this, and hopefully you can at least survive a little bit, if not do a ton of damage. And then Revealing Flare, the reason we put it on our bar, we only need it for the passive. It gives us major protection, which is just further increases our damage, decreases our damage taken by 10%. And then for our ultimate, we're going to use our bear, our Wild Guardian, which is the morph of Feral Guardian. This just does a little bit more damage than the Magicka version, and it does bleed damage instead of magic damage, but that's why we're going to use it. And that's it for our skills. Now, when you're going to do a rotation with this, what you're going to want to do is hit your shocks. It's the first thing you're going to want to always keep up. And then after that, just keep up all your dots, okay? So just cast everything you can. And then our spammable, we want to try to use as much as possible, but definitely every 4 seconds, we want to try to be using our Frost Reach. And then you'll notice as I'm parsing here, hopefully I was able to get some video. I was having problems recording today for some reason. There's going to be several timers on your bar. So you want to, there will be an additional timer sometimes for the major and minor breach. The timers you want to really pay attention to is after 3 seconds, shocks are going to go out. And then 6 seconds after that, more shocks are going to go out. And so you really every 9 seconds you want to be casting this skill. Now, again, the major and minor breach will last for another 10 seconds after an opponent has been hit. So just make sure you're not looking at that timer. That would be the wrong timer to look at. Every 9 seconds you want to be casting our shocks. And then we're going to be running out of mag on this build because we're running a lot of heavy armor. And so that's going to be an issue for us. So you're going to be heavy attacking a lot. That's just fine. But again, try to use your frost reach every 4 seconds. What I try to do is with the timers on, I look, and whenever frost reach says 17 seconds, I know I want to cast it again as my next ability. Okay, because every 4 seconds has a 20-second duration on the timer. So it's 16 seconds. So if I look at it, see 17, by the time I cast it, it'll be at 16, and that'll be 4 seconds. So that's what I try to do and how I kind of time my parse with this build. I will further note that if you are just, you're going to be heavy attacking a lot to get Magicka back. If you need more Magicka or you're struggling a lot, you can actually remorph your Fetcher Infection to the Stamina Morph, just so you can use a little bit of that stamina pool so it's not sitting full all the time. And that it won't really lose you too much damage. And actually, the Stamina Morph has an AoE effect as opposed to increased single target damage. So you will lose a little bit of damage on your single target, but it actually might be better for you if you're in a lot of AoE fights. Similarly, with our Deep Fissure or Scorch is the unmorphed version, you can remorph this to the Stamina version. Just realize that a couple things are going to happen. You're not going to get the minor breach, which is going to reduce your damage if you're running around solo by a significant amount, but it will cost stam instead, and it will work a little bit different. It is an option, but I don't recommend it. And I don't know if I mentioned, but when you're bear, you are going to be using your ultimate with your bear every time it comes up. Every time you see it highlighted, just go ahead and hit that button, and that'll help us. That's just going to increase our damage. It causes your bear to attack an extra time. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about gear. And that's where really the unkillable God Mode Infinite Sustain thing kind of comes in here. So what we're going to be using, just to go over our sets first, is the Master's Perfected Ice Staff. And I'm sorry, you don't need the Perfected version. This is on the PTS, so it just makes sense to always get the best gear. That way it's an apples to apples comparison. So the Master's Ice Staff, this drops from Dragonstar Arena, which is in Craglorn. This is a 4-person arena. Plenty of people go in and solo it. Certainly with this build you could, but it works a little bit better if you get a few people together and kind of run through it, kind of hang out, have fun in comms or whatever, because it takes a while. And also with 4 people, you get an increased, get 3 other people to get drops, and you have a better chance of getting your ice staff. If you happen to get some other kind of Destro staff, like an Inferno or a lightning staff before you get the ice staff, you can go ahead and throw that on and use it. In the meantime, it's going to work just fine for you. It's still going to provide the same benefit. It's just not going to be ice damage. And so this build is really designed for the ice staff, but it'll be okay in the interim while you're waiting. So then for our 5-piece set, we're going to go with Pillar of Nirn. This is an Oakensoul build. So it is, we're going to be using the mythic Oakensoul. And the reason we're using the Oakensoul ring here is because it provides us with a ton of buffs. In addition to all the damage increasing buffs, which is huge, it also provides us with a bunch of major resolve, minor protection, minor aegis. All these abilities, reduce our damage taken by a significant amount, and that's why we want to use the Oakensoul ring. And also why we don't have to have a bunch of abilities on our bar that kind of do those buffs, because we already have them just by putting on that ring. And then for our body, we have 2 more spots left besides our monster helm. And what we're going to do is we want some critical damage because we want to increase our damage done. But we also would like some heavy pieces because that'll reduce our damage taken. So we're going to go with Medusa. So our chest and our legs are going to be of the greaves and chest of the Medusa. This drops from Ark's Corinium, which is an old world dungeon. Not too hard to get. It is a heavy armor set, but it provides critical chance, and you're just using 2 pieces of that. The reason you want to use the legs and chest is because those will provide you with the most armor, the most resistances. Armor it basically provides both mag and stam resistances. And then we're going to go with reinforced on those two pieces. Actually, I'm sorry, we'll do traits in a second. And then last up here is Ice Heart's Visage. This drops from Direfrost Keep. So this will be a vet dungeon you have to go do to get this monster set, but it's not too hard. Only the helm drops from the dungeon, and then you need Undaunted keys to get the shoulders. So you can use a different weight, but here I'm recommending heavy because, again, more resistances, which again reduces our damage taken. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about traits. So on all the heavy pieces here, so our head, our shoulder, our chest, and our legs, we're going to do reinforced. And what that does is it provides us with, it increases the item's armor value by 16% if it's golded out, if it's like the highest quality, but it increases the armor's value by X%. And we want it on the heavy pieces because they already have higher armor rating. Okay, so it's the best bang for our buck by doing it with these heavy armor pieces. And then for the rest of the Pillar of Nirn, it's medium, that's just what it drops in. You can't get it in any other weight. And we're going to go divines with that because we've already got quite a bit of armor and we just want to kind of increase our damage a bit more. I don't think you need more damage mitigation. Honestly, this is probably too much, but it is what it is. And then for our jewelry, we're going to go with Bloodthirsty. Now, this will drop in different traits, and you'll just want to transmute it eventually. If you're low on transmute stones, don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. You don't need to do it. Also, I would note this is golded out. This is on the PTS. You absolutely should not, and I do not recommend that you gold out Pillar of Nirn when you are new because it costs so much. Once you've played for a while, you've got plenty of gold mats and everything else, sure, go for it. If you're independently wealthy, you like to do trading and you're just getting into doing harder PvP stuff or PvE stuff, that's fine, but you don't need to gold this stuff out. Don't feel like you have to for this build. It's going to do less damage, but it's not the end of the world. And then we're going to have spell damage enchants on our jewelry and all max mag enchants on all of our gear. I will note that the heavy armor will drop with health enchants, and then the medium armor will drop a stam enchant, so you will need to re-enchant those with max Magicka, but those are pretty cheap, so it shouldn't be a big deal. And then for our staff, we're going with an infused staff, and we're going with a hardening enchant. Hardening provides a shield for 5 seconds, and with it being infused, we can always have a shield up every 5 seconds that blocks a little over 4,000 damage. So that's again how we get that increased damage. And Ice Heart's Visage, similarly, it does damage to opponents around it, but first off, it creates a shield around you when you do critical damage, and then if that shield is up, while it's up, it does damage to everybody around you. Once the shield breaks, it no longer does damage, but it's every 6 seconds it can be applied, and again, all you have to do is do critical damage, which we're going to be doing plenty of, so it's going to be procced pretty much constantly. So the idea here is that every 5-6 seconds, we're going to have about 9,000 health worth of shields that are going up on us constantly. So that's kind of you could kind of treat it as a heal, but it's really nice. As long as you're attacking, doing what you're supposed to, you're going to be getting those shields. And then CP. So this is a situation where we can really get a lot of extra damage mitigation. So you could change up your blue CP a bit. There are different arguments to be made for using different CP, but what I'm going to recommend is Bulwark, which while you have a frost staff or a shield equipped, it increases your physical and spell resistance by 1900. So we're going to be using an ice staff, so that's going to be really nice for us and just as passive. Duelist Rebuff reduces your damage taken from single target attacks by 6%. This is, for when those bosses are hitting us and it's just a single target direct damage attack, it'll reduce that by 6%, which is really nice. And then Reaving Blows. Whenever you deal direct damage, you heal for 8% of the damage done. So this is just a passive while we're doing our shocks or direct damage, as is our spammable. And so it's just a way of getting a little bit of extra healing just from having the CP slotted. And then Focus Mending. It increases our healing done with single target heals by 2% per stage. Ends up being 10% extra healing. This is probably overkill. You could swap these up. If there's a CP that you like there's one that will reduce your damage taken taken from area of attacks, and that is unassailable. So that's just kind of to the left side of the torso here, our right as we're looking at the mage, and that'll reduce your damage taken from AoE effects by 6%. That's a good CP. You could do Enduring Resolve, which reduces your damage taken by, and that's kind of like a little bit above the belly button area, kind of in the sternum, and that's going to reduce your damage taken from damage over time effects by 6%. You could also do Ironclad, and you actually have to click on and zoom in, and that reduces your damage taken from direct damage attacks by 6%. So those are all good abilities. You could also intersperse some damage increasing abilities in here if you wanted to. But again, the whole point is this for it to be, unkillable God mode, infinite sustain, right? All that good stuff. So, if you look at a different video that I have or someone else has to find out how you can make this more of a DPS video. And then for our red CP, the main thing that we want is rejuvenation. This increases our recovery. And again, when we're running solo and running heavy armor, we're going to be running really low on recovery. So we want that for sure. And then next up is fortified. This increases our armor by a little under 35 points per stage. So we max that out, make sure we slot it, and that'll increase our armor even further. And then next up is expert evasion. This makes it where your next roll dodge is free. It can proc once every 30 seconds. This is pretty huge. And I just love this CP so much because a free roll dodge can save your life. You could move this and slot something else. That's totally viable. Another thing you might want to slot is siphoning spells. So you restore 300 Magicka per stage whenever you kill an enemy. So again, this is a solo build. You're going to be killing a lot of enemies. That's a great way when you're actually in content to get a lot of Magicka back, especially if there's a lot of trash or a lot of ads. So siphoning spells is definitely one I would consider slotting. And then the last here is Ward Master. Reduces your damage taken by 2% per stage, so it ends up being 10% total if it's maxed out while blocking and under the effects of a damage shield. So that just increases the amount of damage you can block if you're getting hit really hard. That's really, again, kind of overkill. So you might want to go with something like siphoning spells to help increase, your sustain a bit. If you find that you're not dying and it's a bit, you find that it is indeed for you a bit of overkill. So anyways, yeah, red tree you can kind of do whatever, and then green tree doesn't really apply to anything. That's just kind of overworld stuff. I mean, it's a great tree, but it doesn't really pertain to this build, so I'm not really going to talk about that. All right, now we're missing a few things, so let's go ahead and talk about it. Mundus, our Mundus stone. So we're actually going to be using the Thief Mundus, and that increases our weapon and spell critical rating. And it just helps us do the most damage, and we don't need more damage mitigation or anything from our Mundus. So that's why we're going with the Thief, just to help us get a little bit extra damage. And then for food, if you really wanted to, you could run Sugar Skulls with this build. If you really wanted that extra max resources, you're going to be heavy attacking all the time, which is totally fine with this build because we do have Oakensoul on. So it's going to give us certain abilities that's going to empower our heavy attacks so that they do increase damage. But I'm using here Clockwork Citrus Fillet. The Clockwork Citrus I'm using here is just because I'm on PTS, so it doesn't cost anything. It basically does the same thing. It's a little bit better version, but you don't need the gold food. You can just go with something that gives you max health, max mag, and then mag recovery, like the Witch Mother's Potent Brew. And I think that's it for this build. There's a few things I didn't cover, like race, and I'm sure there's a few others that are kind of smaller details. You don't need me to tell you what race to choose, especially for a build like this. Choose whatever you'd like. If you're wondering what does the most damage for like a Magicka build, High Elf is a great choice. That's probably that is the best, and usually is almost always the best for Magicka DPS. If it ever is not the best, usually ZOS fixes that before too long. Another great choice is going to be a Dark Elf. They work equally well for mag and stam builds, and so that's why I really like them. But you know what? Choose whatever. If you like a Wood Elf, which is mostly going to be stamina focused, that's totally fine. If that's the flavor you like. My wife loves Wood Elves, makes all of her characters Wood Elves, and it's not going to be that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. Anyways, I hope this build was helpful. If you are looking, if you like this build and you're working with it, and you get to the point where like, I'd like to be doing a little bit more damage. I will have another build guide out on another single bar build, and then a heavy attack build, and then I have a normal, I guess I say normal, I have like an optimal like trials video as well for Brittleden, which is 2 bar, parses about 120k. So there's other options, but this is the far end of the extreme, and then the other end is that that trial build that does 120k. So this one doing half as much damage on the dummy. So yeah, anyways, kind of bookending everything for you. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to drop a comment below, or you're always welcome to come by the That Wasn't the Boss Discord server. We're mainly a trials guild, but we have help channels, and we will give you advice on anything and everything we can. So anyways, guys, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.